Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Kindle release.
You also have a book out for a little longer, right? Oh, that's great.
מיקרופון לא עובד. לא עובד? עובד. תרים אותו אליך. Good morning. You hear me in the end? המיקרופון תרים אליך שיהיה הכי טוב שאפשר. You hear me in the end? Good morning. אפשר ווליום בבקשה? Good morning. My name is Noam Latar. I'm the Dean of School of Communication in the first private university in Israel. I'm very proud to be one of the three sponsors of this gathering, because when Arik told me that the European independent press councils agreed to come to Israel and celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Israeli Press Council, I was surprised, because usually we are used to a bit different attitude in Europe toward Israel. So I'm very happy and I congratulate the Israeli Press Council for creating this event, and thank you for coming here. This session is in the memory of Daniel Pearl, who was murdered in Pakistan in 2002, and actually it will concentrate on can a war correspondent adhere to journalistic ethics when he's reporting from conflict areas while risking his life. But before that, yesterday in one of the sessions, the panel was asked, how do you view journalism in 20 years? And since I am in new media for the past 40 years, I want to show you my answer to that, which you see here. Robots. Robots, vis-a-vis war areas, if you shoot a robot, nothing happens. So, but this is a different lecture, but this is my answer to the question of yesterday. Just 2 minutes about the school that I founded in IDC. We concentrate in new media and innovation, media innovation, and very briefly, we have several departments and laboratories. We have a media innovation laboratory where we teach innovation processes. We teach students of communication and journalism how to be innovative. And today, in the world of journalism, as you well know, it's very important to be innovative. We study how a person can communicate with a computer or with a robot just by the mind, by thinking, and we do it in collaboration with the Weizmann Institute. We have a visual content incubator where our students create new platforms. Israel has become an exporter of new television platforms, which content cross-media, and we have a laboratory. Actually, Dr. Ivan Karniel is sitting here, who lectured yesterday, is one of the heads of this incubator. We have an internet psychology, laboratory for the study of the psychology of the internet. As we all know, the internet affects our well-being considerably. We have an aid agency. In the third year, our students are involved in creating PR campaigns to NGOs, social NGOs, and doing a great work with that. We have created a new platform to brand Israel through Israel innovation. We are not dealing with propaganda, but we have created a very interesting website called nocamels.com, which you're all invited to look. The way it works is the citizen in the world has a problem, he presents it to the search engines. For example, is there anywhere in the world a replacement for a wheelchair? Then the search engines go to our website called nocamels.com, which is updated daily, and at least 5 Israeli innovations, and immediately this person gets a solution. Yes, there is an Israeli solution to your question, And we do solve, the whole motto of No Camels is how Israeli innovation can solve people's problem. And we have friends, we reach over 20 million people. We have friends also from in hostile countries. We have 92 friends in the Palestinian Authority, 99 in Indonesia, 43 friends in Iran, and 45 in Egypt. Even during wars, we get very nice emails. And we have been in operation for the past 2 years and never got a nasty comment. So this is just a brief of what we do in the School of Communication. As I said, it's one of the sponsors. Now I'm back to our discussion today. It's a tough topic. We have here a very distinguished panel of journalist warriors, I call them. We have here Martin Fletcher of NBC News. Now he's with PBS recently. We have Ms. Eileen Prusher, who is formerly Iraqi Afghanistan reporter for the Christian Science Monitor, who wrote a book I will tell you later about. Mr. Itai Engel, would always get us worried. He's an Israeli, but we see his face in Syria and Iran and all sorts of very dangerous places. And we have Lucia Oliva from the Catalonia Press Council. All four of them have very much experience in covering war areas. But before that, we have a very nice presentation by Talia Turtia from Talia. Who will tell us about how UNESCO is being active in trying to safeguard journalists covering war zones. Talia, please.
Well, thank you very much. Well, good morning for everybody, first of all, and thank you for Arik for putting me on this panel. I'm very happy to tell you what UNESCO is doing for safety of journalists. And unfortunately, I have not much time to tell you about our program at large because we work on freedom of expression quite a lot. But now today I have to strictly focus on this one area, which is of course a pleasure for me because it's really at the focus of UNESCO right now. First of all, I would like to say that silencing journalists not only deny journalists' rights journalists their rights, but also it jeopardizes the fundamental rights of the society to be at large to get informed. And that is a very, very important topic for UNESCO at the moment because so many journalists lose their life in line of duty. We often think about journalists when they are killed, that they are foreign correspondents. And they are those journalists who are sent to war places or some difficult areas and they lose their life there. But in fact, most of the journalists who are killed, they are those who are local journalists. They are doing investigative reporting. They are making stories, they are covering corruption issues and so on, and they lose their life when they're doing these stories. And every single killed journalist is too much. And UNESCO is working on this area because of this reason. Our Director General condemns killings of journalists. You can see that in 2009 there were 77 condemned killings, 2010 65, 2011 62, and 2012 the number went dramatically up, 121 killed journalists that UNESCO's Director General Irina Popova condemned. And why UNESCO is working on this? We have, first of all, mandate. UNESCO is the only UN agency that has a mandate in its constitution to promote free flow of ideas by word and image. Secondly, the UNESCO General Conference adopted the Resolution 29, which demands the Director General to follow this issue and condemn the killings of journalists. Then we have the International Program for Development of Communication, and this program follows safety of journalist issues. And what we do is not only condemning, we also asking our member states, what do you do on these issues? Because the impunity is a real issue. 9 out of 10 cases go unpunished. And that is the reason why UNESCO sends letters to member states, to the governments, asking what have you done on this. And every second year we publish a report which status the issues and reports what the member state has replied to us. Another reason why we work on here is that we have developed a plan of action for safety of journalists. And this plan of action was adopted by UNESCO's executive board last year. And let me go a little bit with that. The plan of action is a result of the first UN interagency meeting 2 years ago, where we gathered together about 15 UN agencies, UN offices, to discuss about this issue. We also brought in NGOs, media representatives, and other partners, and we discussed what we could do to improve the situation. And after that, we have the UN Plan of Action, which is the first unique, systematic, UN-wide plan to improve the situation. And it also covers not only traditional journalists, but social media workers and producers, and also in conflict and non-conflict situations. And also all the UN head of agencies adopted this plan of action a year ago. There are 5 action levels there. First of all, how do we strengthen the UN mechanism? How UN work better together to protect journalists? Then how the member states, how can we cooperate with the member state? UNESCO and other UN agencies are in a unique situation where NGOs are not necessarily, because we have the access to member states. We have the access to those member states who are not necessarily respecting freedom of expression. Then we work also with other partners and other organizations and institutions. We raise awareness of the issues, and one awareness-raising issue is, awareness-raising moment is the World Press Freedom Day, which is celebrated every year, 3rd of May. And last year we were in Costa Rica, and the main thematic area was safety of journalists. And we give the prize to the journalist that has put her or his life at risk to protect the freedom of expression. Then we have different kind of safety of journalists initiatives, different activities. We have lots of activities around the globe. For example, we have trained security forces in Tunisia on human rights and freedom of expression for them to understand better the situation. We have different kind of training manuals. We work with a wide set of partners. Then, after the plan of action, we were thinking how to make it happen, actually. We have the nice plan of action, but we have to put it in practice. And then we organized a second UN interagency meeting, and as a result of that, we have an implementation strategy that is for UN agencies, programs, funds. It's how do we can work together make this happen in the countries, in the real places where the problems are. We planned a 2-year period, 2013 and 2014, where we thought that we'll bring this to practical level. We have actually 120 action lines, 120 activities that we plan to do in different places. We work, the important thing here is that we have to work together. UNESCO has started this plan of action and implementation strategy with wide partnerships. But we, anyway, need everybody to come together, because there's no one single UN agency or any other partner who could do this alone. So we're talking about multi-stakeholder approach. And it's also the way to be accountable for each other in this work. This is the partnership picture here. We could put the press councils there as well, somewhere in media. I think press councils are also very important there, because it's looking after the quality of journalism. And once the journalist is professional, it also is a step guaranteeing safety for journalists. Also, the other UN agencies, they work within their own mandate, their own framework, what is they focus program area. Just an example, we work together with the UN Office for Drugs and Crimes. They are producing a technical tool on good practices reporting on corruption based on UN Convention Against Corruption. This is an example how another UN agency can work. So we have brought this work to 4 countries where we are now actually progressing quite well. We are targeting a national plan of action because issues are different in different countries. So we have South Sudan, Iraq, and Pakistan, and Nepal, where we try to measure what we can do, what we can achieve within a 2-year period. There was certain criteria how these countries were selected. Of course, you have to have an issue there, then you have to have partners, the UN has to be strongly present, and also we have to have a government who is supporting for our work. So what do we do in these countries? We try to improve the legislation. UNESCO has 198, if I remember correctly, member states, and not all of them have the legislation that supports freedom of expression. So that's why we try to work on that, to improve the legislation, including the decriminalization, defamation laws, and also the investigations of the cases where journalists are killed. And we try to propose them different kind of safety-related trainings. We also have, our partners have funds for journalists at dangers. UNESCO doesn't have that, but many of our partners do. We're trying to promote network of lawyers to help media professionals. We try to promote a gender-sensitive approach because women journalists often face specific threats. We promote dialogue and national sensitization campaigns towards freedom of expression and different kind of training manual. I'm going to skip the country examples because there are quite so many, but just to say Pakistan, because today we're remembering the case of Pakistan. Pakistan is one of the countries where you have a most amount of killed journalists, but that's the country where we worked, we progressed quite a lot. We have the National Plan of Action for Safety of Journalists, which is available on the internet, and we've had several meetings and a clear plan how to process with this work. South Sudan and Iraq are the other ones. So what were we aiming at? Of course, the ultimate goal is that journalists are not killed anymore. So we want to reduce the number from last year, 121, to as low as possible. Every single killed journalist is 2 months. We try to have a reduction in the number of uninvestigated cases and any other kind of attacks against journalists. And we want to raise awareness of safety of journalists, the work that we do, and we want to get as much as possible people and organizations to join us. Because UNESCO is not the one who is doing it alone. We are a platform, a coordinator, organizer, but it actually, what we want is the other partners to join us, join the forces to work for it. Then we want to increase the awareness and increase the better legislation and availability and accessibility of safety mechanism for journalists. I just mentioned briefly latest, the really new activity that we just started is that UNESCO has this tool, which is media development indicators. It's a kind of tool which we use to assess the media situation in a given country. In Europe, we have done this in Croatia. There are other countries where we've done it, several countries. But there's one part of these indicators is concerning safety. So we have taken that and developed it to a real safety indicators tool, which we can use to assess the baseline in a given country. What is the situation? What are the risks for journalists? So there are different type of questions, like the general questions. What kind of threats journalists have? What are the actual attacks against journalists and media institutions? What the international organizations are doing? Are they supporting special projects? Are they highlighting women's safety? Do they have resources in the countries? Then you have the local level. What are the state institutions and local politicians? What are they doing? What is the academia doing for safety of journalists? And then we have started a global survey on women journalist safety, and I can send you the link so that you can distribute it in your countries among your media to make this, because we want to see what are really the biggest threat against the journalists. We're working together with the International News Safety Institute, International Women's Media Foundation, and Austrian government on this one. You can see that there are some examples of the questions in the questionnaire. So it takes like 20 minutes or 30 minutes to fill it in. It doesn't take more than that. But you can see that there are light questions, but then it comes to the actual, if you really had violence against you at your work. We also publish a newsletter. You can subscribe on that newsletter at UNESCO's website. Thank you very much. This is really in a nutshell.
Well, I hope one of the results of this gathering, this conference, would be a call through Tarja to UNESCO, to the United Nations, to declare the targeted killing of journalists as a crime against humanity. The topic, I'll come back to the session. The question I would like, we have here in our panel, we have extinguished journalists who have covered conflict areas, risking their lives. And we expect a journalist who is covering war zones like Egypt and Syria today to give us good information that we can base a judgment during the crisis as what is going on in the particular area which they are covering. There are two contributions to journalists who cover war zones, and we should, I think, divide them along a time scale. One is that during the crisis, what is the contribution we receive from these journalists who risk their life? And we have seen about 350 were killed in the past 4 years, and along a time scale of a long-term contribution. In my opinion, the long-term contribution of these people is very important, because after the war ends, they write books, and as you will see, some members of our panel wrote books about their experience, which give us the ability to really understand what happened, improve journalism in the future, and really shed good light on what happened during this crisis. So the long-term contribution of this journalist is very important. However, I question what is the contribution of this journalist during the war, and I want to read you a short paragraph. We just had a recent visit from the journalist, Francesca Burri, an Italian journalist who covered the past year the conflict in Syria. And she said in a paper published by Columbia School of Journalism, she said the following, and just to mention, Francesca had 3 academic titles, written 2 books, and spent over 10 years in war zones. And she writes the following: the truth is that we are trapped between a regime that gives us, this vis-a-vis Syria, the truth is that we are trapped between a regime that gives us an entry permit only if we write against the rebels, and the rebels that allow us to see only what they want us to see. We are all a story of failure. 2 years passed and our readers hardly remember where is Damascus. Really, no one understands anything about Syria except for blood, blood, blood. This is why both sides hate us. To get the news, you can connect to the internet for free. The crisis today is of the media, not the readers. They want to understand, not just to know. I think it's quite a criticism, and I think that Daniel Pearl was killed in his search for the why. When he came to Pakistan, he wanted to interview one of the leaders of the opposition, and he was killed in the process of finding the why. So the question I want to pose to this distinguished panel is, does Francesca accurately describe the situation? Can a journalism covering a war under severe risk lead his audience to understand the conflict? Egypt, Syria. And the first speaker that I want to invite is Martin Fletcher, who was for 32 years NBC News Bureau Chief, received 5 Emmy Awards on Palestine issues, Kosovo, Rwanda. Other awards he received: TV Pulitzer, DuPont from Columbia, other Press Club Awards, Edward Murrow Award, and Royal Society Award. Written books like Breaking News. And I learned this morning that Martin is no longer with NBC, but now is the correspondent, international correspondent for PBS. So Martin, you have 10 minutes to tell us whether Francesca is right or wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, that is quite an indictment, isn't it? And that is quite an indictment. I think it's a very serious question. My background, I've been covering these kinds of situations of conflict since 1973. So I'm the old guy on the panel. I'm probably the old guy in the room here. And when you mentioned earlier, in your work you're doing now, you're specializing, among other things, in visual content incubator. So I think that's what I was when I was a cameraman. I'm not sure. Is that what that means? I'm not too sure. So I began as a cameraman. It was very important for me always to be as close as I could be to the story, which I had to be if I was taking the pictures. Now I'm a correspondent and I'm also writing books. Do we make things worse, is what Francesca is really saying, rather than actually helping the audience understand. I can't really answer that question too specifically. I mean, obviously any journalist would hope that it's not true, but the reality is that it's become so much more dangerous today to be a journalist than it was when I began. For the committee for the CPJ, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, said this week that in Syria, during the Syrian conflict, 56 journalists have been killed in the last 2.5 years. I think that's an extraordinary number. Half of whom, by the way, are freelancers. So I've always had the luxury of being with a big organization, Reuters TV, BBC, NBC, now PBS. So I have a big organization behind me whenever I work. Freelancers go into these situations needing the help of people like you much more than I do. I wanted the ethics of what we do and whether we really help is a critically important question. And I wanted to partly answer it by giving an experience that I had, and that stems that is in some way comparable to what Daniel Pearl went through, as he is one of the figures that we are honouring in this meeting today. So we all know his story. He went off to meet somebody he wanted to interview in Pakistan, and in the end got his head cut off. His mistake, if there was one, by the way, is from what I know about what he did, he made every possible correct move in terms of evaluating the threat. He had a lot of information about where he was going and who was taking with him, and it wasn't enough. So the situation I was in Somalia with General Adid after he had killed the 24 Pakistani soldiers, and just before Black Hawk Down, the whole world was looking for him. And I had got to know him, talking about the ethics of journalism, earlier when I was sent by NBC News to cover Somalia. It was just before everybody discovered the story, and it was an extremely dangerous place to go to. There was total anarchy. There was no police force. There was no official organization that you could take in whose hands you could trust yourself. So we contacted General Adid before we went in, my team from Israel, and flew in on his drug plane, the cup that they used to import from Kenya every day. We flew in sitting on bales of this illegal drugs into Mogadishu, and I was on 4 different occasions his house guest. And one of the dilemmas we faced then, by the way, in terms of ethics, was that we were eating the food cooked by his Italian chef that he was stealing from the aid organizations whose theft we were covering. We were reporting on the starvation of the people. Part of it was caused by the theft of their food by General Adid, and we were eating that food. So the question was, is this right or wrong? So it's a real dilemma, because it was the only way we could stay safe in Mogadishu. But clearly, you couldn't really justify this probably in a room like this. I don't know. You tell me. But it was the way to stay safe. Then when General Adid was on the run, NBC sent me back into Mogadishu to try and find him. And we did find him. And we were the only people to find him when he was on the run. But we had established contact with one of his bodyguards who we knew, and he said, "We'll come and get you at night. Wait for us in your room." So somebody came at 9 o'clock in the evening in Mogadishu during the curfew, and it was somebody we didn't know, never seen before. He said, "Come with us, we'll take you to General Adid." So I always consider that a Daniel Pearl moment. What do you do? So it was going to be a huge scoop if we actually found the guy. The downside was a bit worse. of course this was before Daniel Pearl, nobody was thinking about getting their head cut off, but it wasn't a good situation to be in. We went with them, and in the end we decided to go and got the interview and came home safely. But after I heard of Daniel Pearl, what had happened, and not only to him, but to other people too, I understood how basically stupid that was. So there's a lot of stupidity involved in what we do, a lot of trusting to fate. And I think I would say that in the last 15 years or so, journalists have become a lot more equipped to deal with these situations. We go into embedded, so-called embedded situations, joining armies as an embedded journalist. I personally refused to do that with the American army when they went into Iraq, because I felt that I couldn't report the story properly if I was part of an American military machine, or a British army machine, or any kind of military machine. So to get back to Francesca's question, can you actually report fairly and accurately and comprehensively on the story if you are beholden to the people who've either allowed you into the country in the first place or who are fighting that country? I think clearly the answer is it's very difficult. At a certain point, you just have to stand up and report as fairly and accurately as you can. And that's personally what I've always done. I don't believe I've ever been in a situation where I have tailored my report because of the pressure I was under in any of the places I've been. I really don't think I've ever done that. And also in Somalia, I remember doing a story on the Somali police force, which was a joke. They were basically Adid's people being trained under the guise of the police. The stand-up I did with the police walking by and two of their minders listening to every word. I remember saying something about, this is basically an army of Adid's thugs dressed up as policemen. And it took a lot of, my heart was beating. Should I really say this with these people listening? But nothing, there was no payback. So I don't agree with Francesca actually in the end. I think overall, it's a dilemma we face as journalists. And one of the things we have to do as journalists is face that dilemma. And probably the kinds of people who become journalists are able to face that dilemma. There are obviously many, many examples of people who are swayed by the situation they're in. In Beirut, when Israel was fighting Hezbollah was taking the media around the Shiite quarters of the town. Every word was followed by Shiite minders. Every step they were taken was with somebody. They couldn't move by themselves at all. NBC News has a correspondent called Richard Engel whose reports I saw, and every time I saw his reports, I was thinking that everything he's saying is being monitored, and he's really saying it as it is, and he's doing a very good job. So I can't speak for everybody, but I think we are aware of those pressures, and the challenge we face is to overcome them. And I think with the help of people like you protecting our back, if you like, that's a great encouragement. But the bottom line is, as a journalist, you're really out there alone when it counts. And that, unfortunately, has led to the deaths of many of my colleagues and friends, and of all of us too. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I'd like to ask Eileen Bruscher. She's a staff writer for Christian Science Monitor since the year 2000. She's been bureau chief in Tokyo, Istanbul, Jerusalem. Covers major conflict areas in the past decade, including Iraq and Afghanistan. She's teaching in journalism university, NYU and Tel Aviv University. She wrote the first novel, The Baghdad Fixer, which I'm sure you've heard about, and also wrote for Newsday, New Republic, Financial Times, The Guardian, The Observer, The Washington Post, received of a UN Correspondent Club Award in 1998 for the coverage of post-war Somalia. Eileen, your answer.
Thank you, Noam. I thought I would start off by saying that I didn't really know Daniel Pearl personally, but our paths crossed a lot because I was working in Afghanistan and Pakistan in 2001, 2002, around the time that he was kidnapped. Since we are here in part in his memory, and not coincidentally also on September the 11th, I have to say that at the time he was just another colleague, but over time, of course, after his death, I came to admire him more and more. And I think that I, like he, didn't see myself as taking within the realm of people who are foreign correspondents, unnecessary risks. I guess it's a little bit like living in Israel. People outside of Israel think it must be dangerous there, and the Israelis think, oh no, it's only in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, and the Jews might say, no, only in Gilo on that hill where, you know, where they might shoot from Beit Jala, that's where it's dangerous. So it's a little bit like that once you're in that world of journalism. And I, like he, would often go on stories and then not necessarily try to be on the front line once I was there, but to look for the interesting off the beaten track stories, what people in American journalism will often refer to as enterprise stories, meaning it's not necessarily just the daily news that, you know, that often falls into your lap, but it's actually going out and deciding this is you know, an interesting thing that I want to report. Obviously it involves some investigative work and takes more time. And what I want to do with my short time here is to take a look at how much journalism has changed in the decade plus since Daniel's death, and to think about where are we now and where are we going, because one of the things that has changed, I mean, the job has always been a little bit dangerous. I agree with Martin that it's gotten perhaps more dangerous. I don't know that you know, people, you know, covering World War II and the Vietnam War was also very dangerous, but I think probably during the Iraq War, which I also covered, it set a different tone entirely in terms of seeking out journalists with the possibility for, you know, kidnap and ransom or killing, although that was also happening in Lebanon as well, I should probably add. In terms of doing these enterprise stories, you know, it requires getting away from the pack a little bit, and because of that, there is an added danger element, and I would agree with Martin's assessment as well that I think you know, Daniel took those extra steps to try to figure out as he went along, is it safe? In fact, one of the reasons why he was reporting in Pakistan, because at the time, Afghanistan was sort of the front line, it was more dangerous, and he had, you know, his wife was pregnant, and thought, you know, I'll do these, you know, Wall Street Journal pieces where we sit back and spend a few weeks reporting and really think about this story and not be on the front lines. So in the decade or so since his death, and I know this will sound a bit strange, but sometimes when I look back on my reporting in those days, it feels almost like a more innocent time. And what do I mean by that? There was no Facebook, no Twitter, no LinkedIn, no YouTube, no Skype, none of the technologies that we have today, no crowdsourcing, and social networking was something you did over coffee or a beer after you filed your story in the evening, or with a source at lunch, you know, not facing your screen or your iPhone. And I think that is worth taking into consideration as we look back, where were we when Daniel Pearl was killed and where are we now in journalism? Because I think it's really changing the way we act as reporters. Did I just lose my sound? No, it's back, okay. In ways that are both good and ways that are, to me, are a bit troubling. And it's funny that you mentioned that piece by Francesca Lori, who I don't know, but I also read that piece. It went around a lot for those of us in journalism, particularly in war reporting. And I also want to get to that and mention it, but I think she's exactly the example that I want to make. For me, looking back on my experience, not as long as Martin's, I hope I'll get to his level someday, but about 20 years in journalism. When I worked in those days, you mentioned Somalia, where I was reporting in 1998. A satellite phone in those days was about as big as a carry-on suitcase to put on an airplane, and weighed as much as a ton of rocks, and cost a lot of money. So unless you were on a really important breaking story, you didn't necessarily go with a satellite phone. And you would often sort of bid your family and editors goodbye and say, I'll check in a few days. And you would sort of go out into the field and really report. And I think there was a beauty in it, because you would be able to really get into the story, dig up your facts, do your reporting, check in occasionally. I remember there was one time I did a story in northern Somalia where there was really very little communications, and I didn't check in with anybody for a week. And I came back with I felt, with really strong material, and felt like I had really gotten into it. Just a few years later, the technology had changed so much that by the time I went to Afghanistan, soon after the fall of the Taliban, a satellite phone was by then the size of a laptop and portable for everyone. 2 years later, we had the Thuraya phone, which was basically the size of about an eyeglass case. I would say, you know, a little shorter than this. So that by 2003, I could cover Iraq and stick a little antenna, chupchik, whatever they would call that, on the top of the car, and, you know, from a moving car in the middle of Iraq or Afghanistan, send a story with pictures, and that's 10 years ago. So the ability, you know, just in that 5 years, our accessibility in terms of journalists changed radically, and of course, all the more so once we got into social networking. So what's changed now? Being a journalist in 2013 means that it's very rare to go out on a story where you don't check in with your editors for days or a week. You know, maybe, you know, a journalist for National Geographic would have the luxury of saying, you know, don't bother me for a week. I'm going to, you know, in bed with some, you know, tribe in you know, somewhere in Central Africa, and I'll let you know what I find when I get out. We cover it today very differently, and I think journalists, and particularly the freelancers, but journalists in general, are under tremendous pressure to constantly be blogging, updating, tweeting, developing a following, so that it's no longer just about the story that you file, but sort of the tidbits that you are sprinkling out to your followers as you're in pursuit of the story, which, you know, I have friends who are great at it, and I really enjoy following them on Twitter, but I wonder if we're starting to lose some of our sort of long-term vision in terms of what we should be doing in journalism by doing this sort of myopic, you know, how can I put this into 100 and, you know, characters, how many characters on a tweet, remind me, 140, to do this. So, you know, in the lead of that story that you quoted from the Columbia Journalism Review, this is how she started the story. This was her lead. He finally wrote to me. After more than a year of freelancing for him, during which I contracted typhoid fever and was shot in the knee, my editor watched the news, thought I was among the Italian journalists who had been kidnapped, and sent me an email that said, should you get a connection, could you tweet your detention? Now, as an add-on to that, my friend Mona El Tahawi, who's an Egyptian journalist who now has American citizenship and has also lived in Saudi Arabia, she was here 2 years for Reuters back in the 90s, she actually did tweet her detention in Egypt, and she had both of her hands, one fractured, one broken, and she tweeted both that she'd been physically and sexually assaulted. This was in November of 2011. She had gone back to Egypt to report from Tahrir Square, and you can imagine the reverberations of you know, an international and Arab journalist, female. We mentioned the dangers to female journalists, tweeting what had happened to her in detention. I'm really glad that she did it. And she's very brave, but it sets the bar so high that we should be sort of updating, you know, minute by minute what we're doing. And I'm watching that, and I'm wondering, you know, what's it going to be like in I'm going to use this one because that's fading out. What's it going to be like in 5 or 10 years? The last little story I'll leave you with, in terms of journalist safety, and since that was one of the issues of the day, I was covering elections in Iraq in the December of 2005, and I go out to report one day. There were no cars on the road, and you're supposed to do everything on foot. That was the rule. They decided that it'll prevent car bombs, so no one's going out in a car, so you had to cover elections on foot. So I go to cover elections on foot, and I arrive sort of in the lobby, and all women are wearing abayas then, you know, big floor-length burqa covering for women, and you know, I suddenly look like 70 pounds. Why? Because I decided to wear a flak jacket. I'm figuring I'm going to be out on the street all day. I'm going to wear this flak jacket, right? And this is the whole thing. You know, what can we do to increase journalist safety? So my fixer / translator says, "That's ridiculous. Take it off. Take it off." You know, it becomes obvious that you're wearing something. There's no point. And he was talking about my colleague who he usually worked with, who was then somewhere else embedded in the army. And he said, "Jill says all you need is your bulletproof abaya. The abaya is bulletproof. If you wear the abaya, you're safe." Now, tragically, about 3 weeks later, for some of you who remember journalist safety, you might remember the story. I think I'm losing this one too. I'll just shout. I can be loud. So I think it's working again now. So just a few weeks later, that was my colleague Jill Carroll, and she was kidnapped, and our translator was killed. And the truth is, it was a very tragic story. He was killed. She was held for 3 months. And I learned from that experience that there is no bulletproof abaya. There's no full protection for a journalist in any story. Even if she had been wearing a flak jacket then and a helmet, she still could have been kidnapped. and our staff still could have been murdered as they were on the spot. So this is the challenge, I think, to all of us to try to figure out, is there a reasonable level of safety that we can achieve, and then say beyond that, we do choose as journalists to cover this story. No one makes us do it. We don't accept assignments at gunpoint. I think we take on the risk because we care so much about the story and we care about truth-telling, and that's why we're out there.
Thank you very much, Adhering. And now, working? Yeah. And I want to move to the guy who we worry the most because he's an Israeli. He's a very well-known face in Israeli television. I'm talking about Engel, who is a leading Israeli war correspondent with really global experience. He was a staff member of UFDA, which is the investigative TV channel in Israel. He covered wars in Croatia, in Bosnia, Russia, Azerbaijan, Rwanda, Kosovo, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, and recently Syria. He teaches journalism at Israeli universities. He received the Israeli most famous journalism award, the Sokolov Prize. He received an award from the Council for the Press and of Broadcast from London, and he's recently involved in creating 8 programs in Africa. And every time we see his face emerging in Syria or in Iraq, in these really dangerous places, we say, "What? He's there again." His face is known to all of us. Guy, thank you for reporting, and your answer to Francesca. Sure.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, relative to Francesca and what is she saying, that we do not understand really what is happening in Syria. The way I see it, and I will elaborate in a minute, we do not understand what is happening inside Syria, not because of the journalists that are covering Syria, but because of journalists talking and explaining Syria while not being in there. And I'm talking about the commentators, which is a very special species. People who are talking about places they have never been to and explaining and interpreting people they never met. And unfortunately, this is the majority of the journalism here in Israel, and I guess also in other places, countries in the world. I began my field work 22 years ago. I began in Croatia, then Serbia, Bosnia. I've been to the genocide in Rwanda, Congo, then came Pakistan, Afghanistan, Chechnya, Haiti, Indonesia. Recently, I've been to Lebanon and the revolution in the Arab world, Tunisia, Egypt, and Syria. Specifically, my problem, being an Israeli, if people in these places know who I am and where I'm coming from, I'm dead in a minute. And maybe we'll relate to it in the way I am able to get in and to work later on. But, I studied and I began my work in the office. I was a foreign affairs editor in the Israeli army radio station. So mainly I've been a commentator. I mean, I never went out, but, I reported about everything that is going on in the world. I was sort of a commentator. And the thing is, people held more, from commentators, not from journalists in the field. The idea was that, the wisdom is within the commentators, not the people who are going out. A few months after I began my work, it was the massacre in Tiananmen Square in '89. And then, 3 months later, the Berlin Wall came down. All the Eastern Bloc, was completely destroyed. And what was in common, I think, to everything is that, for once, at least, being young as I was, it was the first time that events and historical events were happening not because someone very important, way at the top of the government decided, that we have to do it, but it happened from the streets. There are specific points in history, quite rare, but things are coming from the bottom. From the bottom, it happened in the Eastern Bloc, and obviously, to much more extent, it's happening in our neighborhood now. And the thing is, I will always remember my shock, because the same domino effect that brought down all these regimes, I think it brought down the commentators as well. You heard them speaking and trying to explain what is about to become, not only giving the background, but also predicting. Because here in Israel, for example, everybody wants to know what is going to happen next, tomorrow, and nobody knows. I mean, if you try to check out, what people said for the past 2 years in Israel, it is humiliation, because everything was a complete failure. But still, people want to know, because it's a dissonance, to live in this country without, okay, give me an answer. Am I about to be bombed, Is this guy about to attack us? Are we about to be demolished? So everybody is trying to be tempted to provide answers, and nobody really knows. So at that time, I remember in the Eastern Bloc and also here, all the commentators try to explain to us what is going on. And I remember when I was a foreign affairs editor, the only people who really provided me with information valuable were people on the outside. I remember listening also and watching Martin, for example. He was one of them. And that was the point that I decided this is what I want to do, because this is the only thing I appreciate, people who are going out. And I think that every journalist knows it, and knows the feeling that once you get to the field, to a place, it doesn't matter, if you have 3 degrees in the university about the region, about the phenomena, but once you're in the field, your knowledge and your understanding of the place are multiple, I don't think by 2, but by 100. Immediately you understand so much than what you thought you knew before going out there. Because understanding street, understanding common people, and not only, history and the way of method being taught at the university. So I think, especially now, regarding the events in Syria, Tunisia, and Egypt, if people want to talk about what is going down there, they should go there. And unfortunately, people who are used to speak with prime ministers and very important people and very high sources, for them, I think it's kind of a feeling of less of respect, to take out the tie, to take out the makeup from the faces, and go out there and do a field work. So they're not doing it. And sometimes, their insights are becoming irrelevant, because, the street are doing the history now, and if you're not going out, you're not there. You have to go, but people are not doing it. So the way I see it, you have to be there. And I know that as an Israeli, when I go out, and when I, bring Israelis' voices from Syria, for example, people sometimes say to me, this is really what they told you? This is really what they told you? I don't believe it. And why do they don't believe it? Why they don't? Because they hear, there is a kind of an obsession here in Israel, to make us understand that we are all surrounded and everything is kind of personally, deliberately against us. It's not the will of a people in the places around us. So everybody wants to hate us, everybody wants to demolish us. And if I go to Syria and I hear people in there speaking about, listen, I have no problems with the Israelis. I have problems with the Israeli government, yeah, but not with Israeli as an Israeli. People here find it hard to believe. And these are things that you are able to understand and able to bring only if you go out. You will never be able to imagine it, even, if you're staying here inside with all, the university degrees and everything. So the way I think, you have to go out. Once going out, the level of your responsibility and professionalism is something else, because not going out is enough. I mean, going out is not enough. I mean, you have to do a very serious and responsible work, but this is for, I think, later on in the panel.
Thank you very much, Itai. Later I want to present a question to all of you, part of which Eileen already answered. How important is it to go out when we have social networks, Twitters, video, YouTube, but don't answer it now, we will refer to it later. I would now like to send our students for graduate work. Co-author of the Las Noticias in Televisión, and been awarded twice the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Lucia, is Francesca right, or are your colleagues here all right?
Thank you, Noah. Well, in fact, I agree with my colleagues here. And I have to say that I was a small reporter from a small country, and so I'm a little here feeling a little small. But, well, I have to tell that the case of Daniel Pearl touched me very much, because I had been in Pakistan 1 year ago, and I could experience how difficult and how risky it was to report in this country about issues that are very important because affect the whole world. But you cannot, I realized that sometimes it was very difficult, almost impossible, to do independent and fair reporting of those issues. Even though many reporters have always died in wars, I think that as a reporter and foreign correspondent, I have seen a main change in my lifetime. When I started to cover stories around the world, in a conflict, there was always a part that appreciated the presence of the reporters there. One part were ready to talk to us, the international reporters. This part would help us to move, even they would be ready to protect us if necessary. These people believed that we, those international reporters, would make their voice to be heard around the globe. They were the voiceless in some kind of conflict, many times the victims of an injustice, the rebels of a cause. They trusted in this bunch of international journalists who suddenly appear in a conflict and disappear when it is over. In the past, according to my experience, governments tried to manipulate us, to stop us from reporting, to confuse us. I remember the control of the press during the Falklands War or the invasion of Grenada. Only very few reporters were allowed to go there. However, even after the fall of the Soviet Union, in the wars that followed in the former republics, there was people who trusted in the international press to tell their story to the world. Now, this is the jungle, and reporters are on their own, and they have to embed in military units where independent reporting is questionable. It's a danger in any sense. However, I think that this happens because international journalists are no longer considered an independent voice. We are judged according to our media, our nationality, our ethnicity, and not welcomed by neither one of the parts as my colleagues have said here. We are not safe anywhere because we are considered either the enemy or a coin to exchange. So I have to say also that some reporters have lost credibility because in some cases we have been the first defenders of the powerful and the defenders of the status quo. So what happens is that many areas of the world are almost close to the Western reporters, and this has affected the way we report, the quality of our reporting, and damages our credibility. And also it affects the right of the people to know. It becomes very difficult to tell some stories in a fair, independent, and sometimes coherent way. Another change that I have lived is that many companies are sending the reporters to the wars or to conflicts. In the past, at least in Spain, only very few media send reporters to the conflict zones. And now many media decide to send their reporters, so the companies have no experience about how to deal with that. And also the embassies, at least the Spanish embassies, are not prepared to deal with this big bunch of reporters that come there, and so they are not prepared to maybe sometimes to protect them or to help them to be safe. About the ethical attitude of journalists, I would like to talk about the pictures. The pictures help us to tell the story, especially the TV journalists, as I was. But sometimes we are, well, in conflict and in war zones, we are taking pictures of children and people who are suffering, and they are in terrible situations. Many times they don't have the opportunity to say if they want to be in our stories, or they cannot say anything. And we think that it's the need, we need these pictures to inform our audiences and to realize that this is really a a terrible conflict. But sometimes we do things that we wouldn't do at home, and we try to convince ourselves that we need to expose this or that injustice. So I think this is something that we have to reflect more. About our companies, that the ones that send us to these conflict zones, I think that what my experience is that all they want is to sell. And what happens is that they are not very concerned about our safety. I remember that when I went to Pakistan, I went without an insurance, and the insurance only arrived like 10 days later. But we went because we journalists think that it's our duty to inform about these things, and it's kind of a vocational thing, like doctors take care of their patients, we have to inform. So we do these kind of things, but our companies sometimes are the main enemies of quality reporting. They want us to do a live report from San Salvador, Damascus, Kabul, or Islamabad, no matter what. They don't care very much about what we have to say, as long as we say something similar to their competition. They don't care that you don't know nothing because your plane has just arrived. They want you there, and they want you to do this live report. End of the story. I am very critical of the companies, because they press and press you. If you don't give them what they want, they send another reporter. We are vulnerable, victims of competition among colleagues, suffering the lack of communication with our bosses at home. It's difficult to report fairly, and even though we try our best, we do our best.
Thank you, Lucia. One of the topics that I teach my students is the wisdom of the crowd. It's a big issue today. And the wisdom of the crowd, one of the conclusions is that the crowd is wiser than the leader. I don't consider myself a leader here, but I would like to open now the floor for your questions, because I'm sure you will find better questions than I have. So I open the floor to questions. Yes, Aaron.
Thank you, Noam. Thank you for the panel. It's been fascinating. I'm just wondering, and I'm putting it to you, I'm suggesting that today's war reporter faces the law of diminishing returns. Let's try to think of Syria. Most of what we've seen of Syria this last 3 years almost came from cell phone cameras that, very shaky, very unpleasant to watch, carried by Yuguri TV and some of the local outfits. Very little was done by mainstream media. Now, as the dangers increase, the usefulness of the professional foreign reporter diminishes. And that poses the question of whether we really want to risk so many lives for little, diminishing returns, as I said. Thank you.
Anybody? A good question.
Yeah, Eric, I would just say that when you say in the circumstances, these present circumstances, the need for the usefulness of the mainstream media, people like us, decreases because there's so much access to other forms of information, and Twitter and YouTube, etc. I think the exact opposite, that the usefulness of people like us increases in those circumstances. Because you need a gatekeeper. There's so much more information coming up from all of these places, from all kinds of people, on Facebook, all the social media. I don't have to list them here. We have no idea what the source of that is. We have to more and more. We have to preface our videos by saying we can't confirm the authenticity of it. We're going to show it anyway, basically because it's all we've got. Therefore, it's all the more important to have your own people who are experienced and educated and knowledgeable about that story to be the gatekeeper, to have people like us, I believe, interpreting as well as we can what's going on. So there's a huge amount of information bombarding anybody that goes on the internet, but the skill has changed, I guess, in that the The consumer of information is now being challenged to be his own editor, to go and find what he wants to read and or see or hear. There's no completeness about that. It's true that people like NBC News, we distill everything down to 2 minutes plus an interview. That's also totally incapable of explaining the story. But it's part of the whole. And so I would only respond specifically to what you said by saying that people like us are more important than ever.
Right. Eileen, is there? You want that?
I guess I would just add to that I think, particularly, for example, with Syria, because it was so dangerous and the regime was not giving out visas, many mainstream news organizations, I think, were reluctant to send correspondents in. So it was often the freelancers who would go in. The freelancers were the ones who would go in anyway, and because they had the access. Because they were in, people would start taking their material, be it film or print. But I think it gets into sort of shaky ethical territory. And I know when I was working for the Christian Science Monitor, which I'm not anymore, but we ran into the situation where a reporter was kidnapped and she was a freelancer. So that often means that that person does not have health insurance or life insurance through the organization that they're reporting for, but in some cases they might be reporting for that organization for months or years. So retroactively she was sort of made a staff person, so she would have all of her insurance. It doesn't always work that way. And I think one of the biggest issues, and Naomi mentioned this book that I wrote in Baghdad Fixer, I was a little bit looking at the role of the fixers, because one of the things that we all know as reporters, and maybe it hasn't just come up yet on this panel, is that we depend very heavily on local staff when we get into a country. When you described that situation just now, Lucia, I just arrived and you want me to tell you, get on camera and tell you what's going on, and I barely, unpacked a thing yet. How do we usually manage to do that and get our stories out in a few hours? Is that we have local contacts on the ground. A lot of us call them fixers, producers, what have you, and they help us get the story. And their lives are often, ever more in danger than those of us who are international correspondents who come in. As it was pointed out, they die, and are killed in much higher numbers than foreign correspondents are. Don't often get as much attention or credit for what they're doing. And yet we in the international media really rely on them. So I think there is some movement to recognize that and say, whether it's coming from NBC or some local stringer, the news organization also has to consider the responsibility that it owes to the local young journalists who are often putting their lives on the line, and not just the senior international people who, of course, bring in a whole other level of experience, but are usually not going to be based in Syria full time.
I think that it's very important to go to these places, even though there are all these technological resources that exist today, because I think that when you go there, you see things that you cannot see in other way. And even though when we are there, we cannot go to certain places, we cannot interview to certain people. Maybe sometimes we are giving only a part of the story, just what we see with our own eyes. But I think it's necessary that we all are in the field, because maybe the report of one people, the other, that may do the whole picture.
Yes, John Hamer from the Washington News Council in Seattle, Washington. Martin, you and Lucia both referenced being embedded. Martin, you said you did not want to...
Can you raise your voice, because I don't think people can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Is this better? Sorry, I didn't press the button. Martin and Lucia both mentioned embedding, and Martin, you said you did not want to be embedded because you didn't want to be part of the American military machine or the British military machine or any other military machine. And Lucia, you said it might raise questions about the credibility of the reporting. I would like to ask both Ita and Aline, have you been embedded? Do you believe that being embedded fatally compromises a reporter's ability to report on what's happening? Do you see value at all in embedding reporters who might want to be able to do stories important to the families of the military forces that they're embedded with, and that's part of the story too, to tell the people back home what's going on. I guess I'm trying to get a sense, is embedding always something to be avoided, or is there value, are there times when it can be helpful? And if more reporters are embedded, might we have fewer fatalities?
I'll address that. I actually haven't been embedded. Similar to Martin, I had a few opportunities to, but I always felt that it was better to sort of go, as in the Iraq War they called this unilaterals, and because I really wanted to get out and talk to people, and I felt that maybe another reporter from the news organization who was coming from America, who didn't have as much international reporting experience, but had always wanted to be a Marine, like that, embed that guy, and I knew lots of, and women who did it as well. I do think there's a value to it. I mean, if you're a news organization that has enough staff to go around, I think it's another important part of the story, as you mentioned. I mean, it shows things from a different end, and I was always curious to get access to another part of the story that I felt that I could get as a reporter who had, worked a bit in the Middle East, up until that point of covering the Iraq War, for an example. But there are some reporters who do a great job of their embeds and do manage to get very critical information. I mean, for example, Dexter Filkins, in his book, does some amazing reporting called The Forever War, which he did as part of embeds, and Sebastian Younger, so I think you pronounce it with a Y, but I'm not sure. I think it does serve an important role. I think the limitation is if that's the only way you can get in, as Lucia was saying, I think it really limits our view. It's really hard to go out and ask an Iraqi, so how do you feel about these guys sort of rolling their tanks down your street? I mean, what kind of answer are you going to get? I think work's so multifaceted, and the more sort of, ways we can get, different sites that we can get on the story and not just have one viewpoint on it, the better. I'm glad that it exists, but if it were the only way we could do a story, I would be very against it, and I think, we know what the limitations of it are. Itay.
Thanks. I began my point of view more or less the way Martin saw it. I thought, you never should go and be embedded, and I changed my mind completely. Because I realized, very soon in my work, that it is not only, military and chief of staff and commanders. It's, a soldier in the field, and the moment of rage can change everything. Really, can change and dictate, all the process of a war. And I wanted to be with these guys and see, what are they conditioned, what are their life, and when is this moment come, that you're actually losing. Even if you're not an uptight person or a very crazy one, there comes to a point when everybody becomes crazy. And for me, as a foreign journalist who is covering conflict, you have to be there. You have to understand and to explain it to other people, who absolutely cannot absorb it. So, I absolutely agree that this should not be the only element in your coverage, because then, it is absolutely ridiculous. I remember the Gulf War and, the CNN people inside being embedded, and everybody, chanting, with the soldiers and the commanders. This is not it. I mean, if it is only one element of the all coverage, it is very good and very important. And I have to tell you, maybe there is one differentiation that has to do with it. If you cover live, you're in big trouble. If you don't have to cover live, I don't have to cover live. I'm with them, I'm going with them, but then I have my time. I have my time, and I have my ability to analyze what I saw. I don't, people are not checking with me, what are you saying, you cannot stress this, you cannot talk about this, and then the embedded, is really at the service of someone. But if you have the time, you are with them, but you have the time and you're doing it later on, and this is what I do, because I cannot report you from this place. It's only when I gather all my information and I'm coming back to Israel, you have much better knowledge about everything. And when I've been in 2006 with the Israelis over there, it was amazing, because we're a country that fights all the time. And when I brought my piece from there, it was a battle, unfortunate battle. You know, people...
You mean Lebanon? You mean Lebanon?
In Lebanon?
Yeah.
In Lebanon?
Yeah.
Yeah. People say, oh my God, this is how it looks like? This is a battle? This is a war? And it's Israel. No, it's where people are fighting, unfortunately, all the time. So when you are embedded, you can see what is happening there, really in a battlefield. Something that over there it could have been only, you know, being embedded with a platoon over there.
Just to make myself clear, I've got nothing against being embedded. It's just that I don't want to do it. Most journalists from the NBC or from other organizations would prefer to be embedded because now it's easier. You're being taken around by the American army, and you're being looked after, and you're being fed, and you're being transported, and you've got somewhere to sleep at night. It's much more comfortable. It's easier, and also you're closer to the soldiers. You tell their personal stories. For any country, that's the critical thing, important part of our coverage. But that's what most people do. What I can bring to the game is something different. I'm the guy that would walk across the Hindu Kush with the Mujahideen, and not many people will do that. So that's what I would rather do. And I have nothing against other people being embedded. It's different parts of the story. But let me just give you one example of what the dangers of that is. When I was with the American military in Afghanistan, I wasn't embedded because you weren't going out on. I was with the American military in a FOB, a forward operating base, and a couple of the soldiers showed me a video that they had made. One of their guys had made on the computer, and it showed one of their units coming under fire. They called in air support against a village in the mountains, and they said, "Look at this!" And they put it to music, so rock music, one of these sort of macho rock music videos, and it showed this village being obliterated by American weaponry, bombs and planes, obliterated. The entire mountainside went up in smoke. And as I was looking at it, I was thinking, "Oh my God, this is what the Americans are doing in Afghanistan. This is the so-called pinpoint response to attacks on their field." They would destroy the entire village. It was amazing what I was looking at. And I was thinking, well, what do I do now? So I had been, these guys, we were very friendly with these people. We'd spent a few nights sleeping. And they were showing me basically they would have been, I don't know what would have happened to these guys if I had reported that story, if I had got hold of the video. And in the end, we discussed it with my team. We said, we can't really sell these guys down the river. Anyway, we didn't have the video. We couldn't, so we would have just been able to talk about it. But that was an example to me of the danger of being embedded, that you get information that you can't use because you become so personally indebted or your relationship is so strong with the people you're with. I totally agree with the title, that you get access to things that you wouldn't get access to otherwise, and it's important. But there are very strong dilemmas, which I personally prefer not to be involved in my reporting.
If I could just have one last point in that I remember specifically working in Iraq and Afghanistan where local people feel very confused by the idea that journalists embed with the forces, because there we are trying to convince them that we as journalists are there independently, that we're not there as representatives of our government, and I found that to be very challenging in certain countries where there's not a free press. And then you have the situation where reporters are embedding, and I think it sometimes confuses people because they think, well, I thought you're supposed to be independent, so how is it that you're sort of traveling with a military unit?
Short question, a short answer, because we need to run out of time.
5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting panel. Having so much experience, I would like to ask your advice. What do you think about the way we Israelis treat the foreign reporters? Do you have any advice on that?
The reporter being treated by Israel, I think you could do much better. I mean, having just argued against being embedded, I think that what would help Israel and would help us is to be much more, to take us out much more quickly when things happen. Waiting for 2 or 3 days to go by before you begin to think about should we take anybody out I'm talking about, in Israel you're always talking about military stories. It's really, that's what you're talking about. We need, in your planning, you need to include the foreign media from the very beginning, because communications, as we all know in this room today, is half of what the success of a war is. We should be included in the planning much earlier on.
We in Israel love this journalists that cover us favorably and dislike strongly those who are not our supporters. Aileen, do you have any?
Let's open also
more
Okay,
questions.
any more questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is it coming through? Yeah, okay, good. My name is Risto Uimonen and I come from Finland. For the time being, I'm the chair of the Finnish Media Council. But I've been one of the bosses, which Lucia described so beautifully. I've been sending people to dangerous places. And you have been talking that the number of freelance correspondents has increased a lot, and I agree. And when we watch, especially television news in Finland or elsewhere, and read the newspapers, so we see a lot of reports coming from freelancers. And I'm trying to raise up a rather philosophical question, which may be difficult to answer, but I'm interested in knowing your opinions because you have been working on the field, on danger spots. Are we going to have a better informed audience, the public listeners, viewers and readers, when the number of the freelance correspondence is increasing and when the costs of traditional media editorial offices are cut all the time? So they cannot afford to send people abroad to different difficult places. So and when I send a correspondent, my own correspondent to a difficult spot, I can rely on him. I know that he is a good person and he tries to be as objective as possible. But now when we get reports from all over the world, from freelance correspondents, can you rely on what we hear, listen and see, what they report? And what are their sources? Where do they get their information? Are they advancing interests of some people, some organizations and so on? You have seen what is happening in the field. So what is your opinion? Can you briefly answer this?
I should briefly say that Francesca Vori is a freelance reporter. Please.
I don't hold the microphone there, but maybe to say briefly that when you use freelancers, you're handing over control of your own organization to people who you don't know who they are. So the question then becomes, how do you vet them? And as you mentioned earlier, most organizations will simply, when they need something, they just need it and they'll put it on the air, they'll try and check. So you lose control and ultimately you can lose credibility. But as the main organizations are saving money by closing down many of their overseas operations and are more dependent on outside sources, there's a new industry growing, which is the growing industry of freelance organizations. So for instance, NBC News has just signed a contract with, I believe it's Global Post. You know Global Post? It's a collection of freelance, it's an organization that has taken over what we used to do actually, and has its own freelancers around the world who are very good, so we're told, and have been vetted by that organization, they're all professionals. So we've now in a sense outsourced much of our foreign coverage to freelancers who are working within organizations. So there's a new industry that is responding to that dilemma.
I absolutely share your concern, and I think in Syria the situation is much more severe now. In Syria, the work of most of the journalists, is kind of, I would call it like sorties. You go to Syria to 1-2 days at the most, and this is what more than 90% of the journalists are doing now. I mean, it is really dangerous, but there is a passage to Aleppo from Turkey, and it takes you only 1 hour and a half. But the situation is so intensive, so people are able, within 1 day to provide very good photos or very amazing stories, and this is enough. And then they are coming back, unlike, being there, like Afghanistan, Sarajevo, whatever, for weeks or for months, and then understanding much more. And the thing is, like Martin said, there are people who are very responsible, but at the end it's up to the individual. And because you have so many freelancers, and because of the economic hardships, people see Syria, for example, as this is my chance. And then they are going in. And they have good stuff. But, from one example that I know, someone has a big story, but, he was told by the one who told him, please don't show my face. You took my photo, but don't show my face. I risked my life. He came back, he offered it to a few people, editors, And then the editors, one of them say, yeah, it's a good story, give it that. And then he said, the journalist, by the way, you shouldn't unveil his face. The editor said, without his face, without this expression on his face, nothing comes through, you know, it's useless. Come on, I know these remarks, we can show their faces, you know, just something that he tells you, you're a kid, I'm an editor, believe me, you can show it. And his face was shown. I mean, lack of responsibility, and he risked the guy of this one in Syria. And for him, you know, it's life or death, you know, for the freelance. This is my chance. This is my only chance. If I won't make it in a crazy place like Syria, I would never be able to, you know, fulfill my dreams, being a journalist, you know, a cameraman, photographer in a war zone. So, you know, there is a lot of irresponsibility in those places. So we have more journalists, but I think less responsibility and people to rely on. So if we began this conversation with, you know, and I share Martin's view, I mean, you should go there as a journalist because there's so much information and so much chaos, but, you know, adding too many freelancers is adding to the chaos, not necessarily, you know, putting everything in order.
I came to this session with questions in my mind, but after listening to the four of you, I'm convinced that we do need good gatekeepers of information, even in this new era of new media. And I think I would like to request you, press council from all the countries that you came, I think these people deserve, these journalists represented by this four, but these people deserve protection for their lives, because I think they do serve a very important social cause. And I'd like again to ask you to come up with a request from the UN to declare the targeted killing of these people a crime against humanity, because without them it will be very hard, much harder to really create a good picture of what's happening in the backgrounds. So I wish to thank very much to our distinguished panel, and thank you again for coming here and for listening. Thank you very much.
Very good.